Billionaire's son pretends to be poor on first date. What the waitress did when he couldn't pay left him in tears. Ethan Cole had everything money could buy, and that was exactly the problem. As the only son of a tech billionaire, he'd spent 26 years wondering the same haunting question. Does anyone actually see me, or just the fortune standing behind me? Every friendship felt like a transaction. Every date felt like an audition for his bank account. So when he matched with Grace, a warm-hearted nursing student with a laugh that made his chest ache, he made a decision that would change his life forever. He would become invisible. No designer watch, no sports car, just a faded jacket from a thrift store, a bus pass, and a story about being a warehouse worker barely scraping by. If she liked him like this, broke, ordinary, unremarkable, then maybe, just maybe, it would be real. The date was perfect, too perfect. They talked for 3 hours at a small family diner on the edge of town, the kind of place with sticky menus and bottomless coffee. Grace never once glanced at her phone. She asked about his dreams, not his job title. She split her fries with him without being asked. For the first time in his life, Ethan forgot he was rich. Then came the moment he'd planned all along, the test. When the bill arrived, Ethan reached into his pocket, let his face fall, and whispered the words he'd rehearsed in the mirror. "I'm so sorry, I can't pay. My card was declined, and I don't have enough." He braced himself for the reaction he'd seen his whole life in reverse. The disappointment, the disgust, the quiet judgment. He expected Grace to make an excuse and leave. He expected the manager to be called. He expected humiliation. What he didn't expect was the waitress. She was an older woman named Ruth, with tired eyes and flowers still dusted on her apron from a double shift. She'd been watching the young couple all evening, and when she overheard Ethan's confession, she did something so unexpected, so quietly devastating, that this billionaire's son, a man who could buy the entire restaurant chain with a single phone call, broke down in tears right there in the corner booth. Because Ruth didn't just cover the bill. What she said as she slid the receipt across the table, and the secret she'd been carrying for over 20 years, would unravel everything Ethan thought he knew about his family, his father, and the reason his mother disappeared when he was 4 years old. Some tests reveal the person sitting across from you. Others reveal the person you never knew you were. So what did Ruth actually do that reduced a billionaire's heir to tears in a roadside diner? What was the decades-old secret connecting a humble waitress to one of the wealthiest families in the country? And when Grace discovered the truth about who Ethan really was, did she walk away, or did she already know far more than she was letting on? Stay with us, because nothing in this story is what it seems. The jacket cost $4. Ethan Cole stood in front of a mirror in a house with 11 bathrooms and turned sideways, studying a stranger. The corduroy was worn through at the left elbow. Someone had sewn a button on with the wrong color thread, green on brown, and the crookedness of it moved him in a way he couldn't explain. Somebody had tried. Somebody had sat down at a kitchen table with a needle and decided this jacket was worth saving. Nobody in his father's house had ever sewn anything. Things here were not repaired. Things here were replaced. He'd bought it that afternoon at a thrift store on Denton Avenue, and the woman behind the counter hadn't looked at him twice. That was the first thing. In 26 years, Ethan had never once been not looked at twice. The Cole name did that. People's faces changed when they heard it, a small recalibration behind the eyes, a door quietly opening somewhere in their skull, and after that you were never talking to a person again. You were talking to a person doing math. He'd learned to spot the math early. He was 9 when a boy named Trevor Pike became his best friend at the Sinclair Academy. Trevor, who laughed at all his jokes. Trevor, who slept over every weekend. He was 10 when he overheard Trevor's father in the driveway saying, "Just be nice to him, Trev, that's all I'm asking. His dad's the one who decides these things." He remembered the exact quality of the light that afternoon. He remembered how the driveway gravel felt through his sneakers. He didn't cry. He just went inside and got very good, very fast, at watching people's eyes when they said his last name. He was 23 when Bethany Rourke wept in his passenger seat and told him she'd never loved anyone the way she loved him, and 23 and 4 months when his father's security team put a folder on the kitchen island containing texts she'd sent her sister. 8 more months and I'm set for life. He's sweet. He's boring. He's a lottery ticket that talks. His father had tapped the folder twice with one finger. Warren Cole's entire emotional vocabulary lived in that gesture, and said the line Ethan would carry like a stone in his shoe for the next 3 years. Everything in this family was bought, Ethan, including you. The sooner you stop being surprised by it, the sooner you'll be useful. So no, Ethan had not told Grace Bennett his last name. He'd told her he was Ethan, just Ethan. He'd told her he worked inventory at a distribution warehouse out on Route 9, 44 hours a week, and that the bus took him 50 minutes each way, and every word of it had come out of his mouth so easily it frightened him. He'd told her his card situation was complicated. He'd left the Partek in the safe and the Aston in the garage under cover, and he'd taken the 22 bus across town with a bus pass he'd bought with cash, sitting near the back, watching a woman help her son with fractions on her phone, and he was ashamed of how much he'd felt it ordinary. Wonderfully, weightlessly ordinary. The last thing he did before he left the house was stop in the front hall. The founder's wall, his father called it, which was funny because there was only one founder on it. Warren Cole at 31 in a bad suit outside the first Cole Dynamics office. Warren Cole shaking hands with a governor. Warren Cole on a magazine cover under the words, "The Quiet Giant." And at the end, small and half-hidden behind a fern his father's decorator had insisted on, a photograph from 2001. A garage, a folding table, a whiteboard covered in equations. Warren, young and thin and laughing. And on the left edge of the frame, cropped so severely it should have been discarded, a hand. A woman's hand holding a marker. Ethan had asked about that hand exactly once, when he was 15. His father had said an intern without turning around, and something in the room had gone so cold that Ethan never asked again. He looked at the hand for a moment longer than usual that night. He didn't know why. Then he went to catch his bus. The Bluebird sat on the edge of town where the streetlights got further apart, a low brick building with a hand-painted sign and a parking lot full of cracks that somebody had filled with tar in long black veins. It had been Grace's suggestion. "There's this diner near where I do my clinicals," she'd typed. "It's not fancy, but it's my favorite place in the world, and I want to know if you'd like it." He liked it before he was through the door. He liked the bell. He liked that the menus were laminated and slightly tacky and had a coffee ring on the back that had clearly been there since the Bush administration. He liked that a man at the counter was eating pie at 7 in the evening with the moral confidence of a bishop. And he liked Grace Bennett, immediately and completely, in a way that made him feel like he'd stepped off a curb he hadn't seen. She was already in the corner booth, and she stood up when he came in, which nobody did anymore, and she dressed up, not expensively, just carefully, a blue dress and a cardigan and small gold earrings, and her hair was still slightly damp at the temples like she'd rushed. She had a paperback on the table with about 40 sticky tabs sticking out of it. Pathophysiology, 3rd edition. "You came," she said, and laughed at herself. "Sorry, that's a weird thing to say, people cancel." "People cancel on you," Ethan said. "That seems like a system failure." She went pink and sat down, and that was it. That was the whole thing, right there, in the first 11 seconds. They talked for 3 hours. She told him about growing up in Pell Ridge, 2 hours north, in a house where the heat went out every February and her mother sang loudly to cover the sound of the space heater. She told him she'd wanted to be a nurse since she was 11. When her grandmother had a stroke, and a night nurse named Dolores had sat with the family until 4 in the morning and never once looked at her watch. "That's a job," Grace said. "Being the person who doesn't look at their watch, that's an actual job you can have." She told him she had $2,100 in savings, and she was proud of it, and she said the number out loud without flinching, which Ethan found so brave he had to look at the salt shaker for a second. He told her, and this was the strange part, the truth, almost all of it, just with the money taken out. He told her he was lonely in a way he couldn't explain to anyone. He told her he'd never had a friend he was certain about. He told her that when he was a kid, he used to hide in the linen closet on the 3rd floor because it was the only room in the house nobody had a reason to enter, and he'd read there with a flashlight, and once he'd fallen asleep in there, and nobody noticed until morning. Nobody noticed, Grace said quietly. There were a lot of rooms, Ethan said. She reached across and put 2 fingers on the back of his hand, just for a second, and it went through him like current. They ordered too much food. He got the meatloaf, she got the patty melt and then ate half his meatloaf, and she pushed her fries into the middle of the table without asking, without a word, the way people do when they've already decided you're one of theirs. She never touched her phone, not once. It sat face down by the napkin dispenser the entire evening like something she'd deliberately put to sleep. And the waitress kept coming by. She was in her 60s maybe, with steel grey hair pinned back and forearms like a longshoreman and flour on her apron from the pie shift. Her name tag said Ruth. She had the particular tiredness of someone on hour 11, but she moved with an economy that was almost graceful, coffee, water, plates, gone, and she never once interrupted them. But she looked. Ethan noticed it around the 90-minute mark and thought nothing of it. She'd stopped at the end of the counter with a coffee pot in her hand, and she was watching their booth. Not rudely, not curiously. She was looking at him, at his face, with an expression he had no file for, the way you look at a word in a foreign language that you're almost certain you know. At one point, he laughed at something Grace said and drummed his fingers on the tabletop twice, a quick doubled tap he'd done since childhood, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw the coffee pot in Ruth's hand tilt slightly and stop. He saw her put a hand flat on the counter to steady herself. He assumed she was tired. She came by with the pot a minute later, and as she poured, Ethan saw the pocket of her apron gap open, and inside, among the pens and the order pad, there was a folded bill so old and soft it looked like cloth. A 20. It had been torn most of the way across at some point and repaired with a piece of tape that had gone amber with age. "That's seen some things," Ethan said, nodding at it, being friendly. Ruth's hand went to the pocket and closed it with a speed that startled him. "It has," she said. And she walked away. Here is what Ethan Cole knew about his mother. Her name was Elena. She had dark hair. She left in the fall of 2003 when he was 4 years old, and she did not say goodbye, and she did not come back, and the family did not discuss it. That was it. That was the entire archive. There were no photographs of her in the house. Not one. When he was 7, he'd asked his father where the pictures were, and Warren had said, without heat, without anything, "We don't keep pictures of people who leave." When he was 12, he'd found a box in the basement with her college diploma in it, ELEANORMA Heart, Computer Science, Summer Come Lord, and he'd held it for 11 minutes and then put it back exactly as he'd found it, because some instinct told him that if he took it, it would disappear. 2 weeks later, he'd gone back down to look at it again, and the box was gone. What he had instead of photographs were 3 things, and he'd guarded them for 22 years, the way other people guard money. The first was a smell, orange peel, sharp and sweet, and specifically the white pith part, the bitter part, and he had no idea why, and every time he passed a fruit stand in a city somewhere in the world, his chest did something complicated. The second was a song. Not a song exactly, 6 notes, hummed, going up and then up again at the end, unresolved like a question. He had hummed it under his breath in exam halls and in the back of cars and on the worst night of his life, and he did not know its name, and he had once played it to a musicologist at a party who said, kindly, that it wasn't any song she recognized, that it was probably just something somebody made up. Somebody made that up for me, Ethan had thought, and had to leave the party. The third was a sentence. He was 4, he was being carried. He remembered the specific bounce of being carried at speed, the way the hallway lights strobed past. There were raised voices behind a door somewhere below, and a woman's mouth was very close to his ear, and she was saying, over and over, in a voice that was trying so hard to sound calm that it was cracking down the middle. "I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fix this, Sonny. You wait for me." Sonny. Nobody had ever called him that again, not once in 22 years. He'd asked his father about it when he was 17, drunk for the first time, brave and stupid, and Warren had gone very still at the kitchen island and said, "Nobody called you that," and gone upstairs. And Ethan had stood there in the dark understanding, with total clarity and no evidence whatsoever that his father was lying. He never mentioned it again. But he'd built a whole private religion on it. You wait for me. He'd waited. Age 5, age 8, age 13, sitting in the linen closet with a flashlight. Age 26, on a bus, in a $4 jacket, still, somewhere under everything, waiting. His father's version was simpler, and he'd heard it exactly twice. Your mother wanted a different life. She was given a great deal of money, and she took it. This is not a tragedy, Ethan, it's a transaction. She's the reason I know what people are. She's the reason I know what you have to be. And Ethan had believed it, not happily, but he had believed it the way you believe the weather. He was believing it that night at the Bluebird, actually, when he decided it was time to run the test. In the fall of 2003, Ruth Callahan was 41 years old and worked 6 days a week in a big cold house on Ridgemont Drive. She was hired as a housekeeper. She became something harder to name. The Coles had been in the house 18 months. The money was new enough that it still made noise. Contractors in the East Wing, a man coming twice a week to consult about the wine, and Warren Cole was 38 and famous and almost never home. Cole Dynamics had signed the Argus contract that spring. The house had a room in it that was just for coats. And Elena Cole was in the back study with the door open, working. That was the thing nobody wrote about later. Ruth would read the magazine profiles in the years that followed, The Quiet Giant, The Man Who Built It Alone, and she would set them down very carefully, the way you set down something that might go off. Because Ruth had brought coffee into that study 400 times, she'd seen the whiteboard. She'd heard the two of them going at it until 2 in the morning, the good years, the laughing years, Elena saying, "No, no, no, come back. Look at the third line," and she'd seen whose handwriting was on the board. It was Elena's. It was always Elena's. Elena Hart had been the one with the mathematics. Warren had been the one with the mouth. And God, what a mouth! He could sell a drowning man a glass of water, and there had been a time when the two things together had looked like the happiest engine Ruth had ever seen. But engines throw off heat. By 2003, the study door was mostly closed. By 2003, there were lawyers in the house on Sundays. By 2003, Elena had stopped being the co-founder in the press releases and become the founder's wife, and Ruth had watched a bright woman go quiet by degrees, like a room where somebody's turning the lamps off one at a time. And there was the boy. Ethan was 4 and small for it, and he had a laugh like a hiccup, and Elena was insane about him in the ordinary, holy way that mothers are. She peeled him oranges. That was their thing. She'd sit on the kitchen floor, in a $5 million house, on the floor, and peel an orange in one long spiral, and let him hold the spiral like a treasure, while she picked the white bits off the segments, because he hated the white bits. And she'd hum 6 notes. Up and down and up at the end, unfinished, so he'd laugh and shout, "Finish it," and she never would. "Why don't you ever finish it?" Ruth asked her once. "Because then he'd stop asking," Elena said. She called him Sonny, never Ethan at home, Sonny. The last week of October, everything went fast. Ruth didn't know the specifics then and only learned some of them later. That Elena had gone to a lawyer about the company's ownership structure, that she'd found something in the 2001 filings, that she'd told Warren she wanted out of the marriage, and she wanted the boy, and she wanted her name back on what she'd built. What Ruth knew was what she saw. She saw a doctor come to the house on a Tuesday who was not their doctor. She saw Elena come out of that meeting the color of paper. She saw 2 men in good suits go into the study and heard, through a door, Warren Cole's voice at a volume she'd never heard from him, saying, "You will not survive this. You have no money that isn't mine, no name that isn't mine, and no record that isn't going to look exactly the way I need it to look. Take the number. Take the number and go, Ellie, and I will let you write to him when he's grown." And she heard Elena say something Ruth thought about every single day for 22 years afterward. She said, "I don't want the number, I want to be his mother." Thursday night, Ruth came up the back stairs and found Elena in the hall outside the nursery with a duffel bag, holding Ethan on her hip. He was half asleep. She was carrying him fast toward the back stairs and whispering into his hair. "I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fix this, Sonny. You wait for me." There were headlights coming up the drive, 2 cars. Elena turned and saw Ruth, and something happened in her face, a decision made in about a second and a half. She put the boy down. She knelt and pressed her forehead to his forehead. Then she stood up and crossed to Ruth and took Ruth's hand and pressed something into it and closed Ruth's fingers around it with both of her own hands, hard enough to hurt. It was a $20 bill. "Ruth, listen to me. They're going to say things about me. They're going to have papers that say things about me." She was crying and her voice was absolutely level. "If I don't get back, if it takes a long time, and you ever see my boy when he's grown, and he's out in the world somewhere and he's hungry, and he's on his own. Ellie, feed him," she squeezed Ruth's hand around the bill. "Feed my son, and tell him his mother paid for it. Tell him I paid for it in advance. Will you do that, Ruth? Will you do that?" "I'll do that," Ruth said. And the front door opened downstairs. Ruth Callahan was let go 11 days later, without a reference, over a matter concerning a missing piece of silver that she had not taken, and that was never found because it had never been lost. She was told, pleasantly, by a man from Warren's office, that people who worked in homes like that one, and then talked about homes like that one, tended to find the work drying up in a way that was very hard to trace and impossible to fight. The work dried up. She cleaned offices at night. She waited tables. Her husband Dale's kidneys failed in 2011, and they sold the house on Fairview to pay for the part insurance called elective, and he died anyway in 2014 on a Tuesday morning, and Ruth went in for her shift that afternoon because the rent was the rent. 22 years, doubles, splitting shifts at the Bluebird, and a place out by the interstate that closed, feet like bricks, a savings account that never once cleared 4 figures. And through every single one of those years, in the pocket of whatever apron she was wearing, folded and refolded so many times it tore clean across in 2009, and had to be taped, a $20 bill she never spent. Not when the power got cut in February 2012. Not when Dale needed the prescription and she was $11 short, and she stood in a pharmacy parking lot with her hand in that pocket for 4 full minutes. She never spent it. Because she'd said, "I'll do that," and Ruth Callahan had exactly one thing in this world that nobody had ever been able to take off her, and it was that when she said a thing, the thing was said. At 9:48 p.m., Ethan Cole decided to find out who Grace Bennett really was. He'd been dreading it and planning it for 2 weeks. He knew exactly how it would go because he'd seen the reverse of it his whole life, the recalibration, the door opening behind the eyes. He would say the words, and the temperature at the table would drop 4 degrees, and Grace would say something kind, and then she'd say something about an early shift, and he would ride the 22 bus home with the answer. At least he'd know. Ruth set the check down between them, $31.40. Ethan reached into his pocket. He pulled out a card, looked at it, and let his face do the thing he'd rehearsed in a mirror, the flinch, the drop, the shame. He put his hand over his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I can't pay. My card was declined and I don't have enough." The silence lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then Grace was digging in her bag fast, and she was talking fast too. Okay, that's completely fine. That happens. That literally happened to me at a gas station in March." And she was pulling out a wallet with a broken zipper and counting bills onto the table, and Ethan saw her hesitate over the last 20, saw her jaw set, saw her put it down anyway, and he understood with a lurch that he was watching a woman with $2,100 in the world spend 8% of a week of her life on him without 1 second of visible calculation. "Grace." "Don't," she wasn't even looking at him. She was arranging the bills into a neat stack, and her ears were red, and she said, in a voice that was trying to be casual and failing beautifully, "Ethan, please don't be embarrassed. I promise you I don't care. I promise you it isn't a thing." And Ethan Cole sat there with his rehearsed lie cooling in his mouth and thought, "What have I done?" That's when Ruth came back. She came around the end of the counter with the coffee pot still in her hand and set it down on the table, which is not a thing waitresses do, and she picked up the check. And she picked up Grace's money and put it back down in front of Grace and closed Grace's hand over it. "No, ma'am," Ruth said, "not tonight." "Oh no, it's fine, I've got it." "Not tonight," Ruth said again, and something in her voice made Grace stop. Then Ruth turned to Ethan. She was standing very straight. Her eyes were wet, and her hand, the one holding the check, was shaking so badly the paper made a small sound. "I need to ask you a question," she said, "and I need you to not think I'm crazy." "Okay," Ethan said. "What's your last name?" Everything in Ethan went cold. Here it is. He almost lied. He was assembling a lie. He had a whole one ready. Coleman, he'd used it before. "Cole," he said. Ruth closed her eyes. She stood there in the aisle of the Bluebird Diner with her eyes closed and her chin going, and Ethan watched 22 years cross a woman's face in about 4 seconds. "Sonny," she said. The word went into him like a nail. He heard himself make a sound. Grace was saying Ethan from very far away. The diner had tilted somehow. The fluorescent light had gotten loud. "What did you say?" "I knew it was you the second you tapped the table," Ruth said, and now the tears were just running unmanaged, and her voice was steady the way Alina's had been steady. "You did it when you were 3 years old, 2 little taps, right on the tray of your high chair like a judge." She let out a wet, wrecked laugh. 22 years. You've got her exact face. You've got her exact damn face. Do you know that? Nobody ever told you that, did they? "Who are you?" Ethan whispered. "My name is Ruth Callahan. I kept your mother's house on Ridgemont Drive. I made your lunches for 2 years. She wiped her cheek with the back of her wrist. "And I have been waiting for you since October of 2003. Then she reached into her apron pocket. She took out the folded, taped, cloth-soft $20 bill, and she put it on the table on top of the check, and she slid it across to him with 2 fingers, slowly, the way you hand over something that belongs in a museum. On the back of the check, in ballpoint, she had written 5 words. "Paid in full, 2003, Eleanor." "She gave me this the last night I saw her," Ruth said. "She put it in my hand and she said, 'Ruth, if you ever see my boy out in the world and he's hungry and he's on his own, you feed him. And you tell him his mother paid for it. Tell him she paid in advance.'" The diner was completely silent. The man at the counter had put down his fork. "I've carried it every day since," Ruth said, 22 years. "Through every job I've had, I never spent it, not one time, not when I should have, not when I had to." Her voice finally broke. "So you sit there, honey, you sit right there and you let me tell you the truth, because your dinner's already been paid for. Your mother paid for it before you could read." And Ethan Cole, who owned 4% of a company worth $91 billion, who had never in his life been unable to buy anything, put both hands over his face and sobbed in the corner booth of a diner on Route 9 like a 4-year-old boy in a hallway. "She didn't leave you," Ruth said. They'd moved to the back booth. Ruth's manager, a kid of about 30 named Denny, had taken one look and told her to take whatever she needed and started making coffee himself. She didn't take a check and drive off, whatever they told you. She was removed. "Ethan, there's a difference, and I've had 22 years to think about the difference." She told him everything. The whiteboard, the handwriting, the 2001 filings, and the lawyer and the doctor who was not their doctor. The word unwell, deployed carefully in front of the right people, in the right rooms, a woman working 90-hour weeks and sleeping 4 hours, and finally saying out loud that something had been stolen from her, and how easy it is to make that woman sound like she's coming apart. How cheap it is. How reliable. "You have no money that isn't mine, no name that isn't mine, and no record that isn't going to look exactly the way I need it to look. The 2 cars in the drive, The duffel bag, you wait for me. There's a song, Ethan said. His voice didn't sound like his. 6 notes, it doesn't finish. Ruth put her hand flat on the table. She never finished it on purpose, she said, so you'd keep asking. Ethan Cole put his head down on the table of a diner booth and stayed there for a while, and Grace Bennett sat next to him with her hand on the back of his neck and did not say a word. When he finally sat up, he said, "Where is she?" And Ruth looked, for the first time all night, frightened. "Ethan," she said, "I need to tell you something else, and it's going to be hard." But it was Grace who spoke. "Ruth," Grace said quietly, "it's okay, I'll tell him." Ethan turned, and Ruth Callahan looked at Grace Bennett with the specific, unmistakable expression of a woman looking at somebody she already knows. "I need to say all of it at once," Grace said, "and you're going to hate me for about a minute, and I need you to let me finish." "Grace, I did my clinical rotation at Harrow House," she said. "It's a memory care facility. It's 4 minutes from here. That's why I love this diner. That's not a lie. I've eaten here 200 times because it's the closest food to my rotation." She was gripping her own hands. "There's a resident there, early onset Alzheimer's. She's been there 11 years. Her chart says Ellie Hart." Ethan couldn't breathe. "She doesn't have visitors. She has one visitor." Grace's eyes went to Ruth. "Every Sunday. Sundays are the only day Ruth doesn't work a double." 11 years, Ruth said hoarsely. "I found her in 2015. Took me 12 years of looking." "Ellie has one photograph," Grace said. "It's laminated because it got so worn. She holds it. She holds it constantly, and when she's frightened it's the only thing that brings her down. It's a picture of a little boy, maybe 4, holding an orange peel in one long spiral, and he's laughing so hard his eyes are shut." Ethan made a small sound. "And on the back, in pen, it says Sonny." Grace's face crumpled and she pushed through it. "Ethan, she says that name maybe 50 times a day. She asks where he is. She asks if he's coming. She apologizes to him. She says, 'I'm sorry it took so long, and I am a 24-year-old nursing student, and I did not have one single thing to give her for 8 months, except he's on his way, Ellie. He's on his way.'" "You knew who I was," Ethan said. "I knew what you looked like." Grace's voice cracked. "Ruth had told me the family name. I didn't believe her. I'm sorry, Ruth. I didn't. I thought it was a story. And then in February I saw a picture in an article about Cole Dynamics. There was a man standing behind Warren Cole, and I stopped dead in the hallway because it was the boy in the photograph. Same face, just grown." "So you found me." "I found 14 ways to try to reach you," Grace said, "and every single one of them ran into a wall. I called Cole Dynamics 11 times. I wrote letters. Do you know what happens to a letter from a nursing student that says, 'I think I've found your mother'? It gets shredded by somebody making $42,000 a year, Ethan. That's what happens, and I don't even blame them." She wiped her face. "So when your profile came up, yes, I swiped right on purpose. That's the ugly part, and I'm not going to dress it up. I went into this planning to sit across from you and say the words Harrow House and then walk away and let you decide what to do with them. And you walked in wearing a $4 jacket and told me you used to hide in a linen closet." Grace laughed horribly, wetly, "and I sat there for 3 hours falling in love with a warehouse worker and thinking, oh no, this is so much worse now, because there was no version of tonight where I told you and you wouldn't think every second of it was a con." She looked at him, ruined. "You were testing me for gold diggers. And I was sitting there terrified that you'd find out I wanted something so much bigger than money." Nobody said anything. Then Ethan Cole started to laugh, and it turned into something else halfway, and he pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "I lied about who I was to find out if you were real," he said. "I know. You are the most real thing that has ever happened to me." "I know," Grace said, sobbing. I know, that's the problem, I know." He didn't go to Harrow House that night. Grace stopped him at the door with her hand flat on his chest and the fierce practicality of a woman who was going to be extraordinary at her job. "Not at midnight, not like this." Her voice was gentle and absolutely immovable. "She Sundance. If a strange crying man walks into her room at midnight, she will be terrified and she will not know why, and she'll still be scared at 4 a.m. when she's forgotten what caused it. That's what this disease does. She held on to his shirt. Tomorrow, 10 in the morning, that's her best window, and Ruth comes with us because Ruth is a face she knows. So instead, Ethan Cole went home and woke his father. He put the kitchen light on at 1:40 in the morning and sat at the island in a $4 corduroy jacket, and when Warren came down in his robe and said, "What in God's name?" Ethan said one word. "Harrow." His father stopped in the doorway, and Ethan watched the most feared negotiator in American software age 11 years, in about a second and a half. They talked until the windows went gray. It came out in pieces, the way these things do, never confession, because men like Warren Cole don't confess, they contextualize. He said the word unstable 9 times. He said you have no idea what those years were like. He said she was going to take you into a 2-bedroom apartment with no security and a public school like it was self-evidently a form of abuse. He said more than once, "I did what I did for you," and Ethan believed that Warren believed it, and that was somehow the worst part of the whole night. But he'd kept everything. That was the thing about his father, he documented. He was constitutionally unable to destroy a file. In the second drawer of the study desk, in a folder with no label, Ethan found a separation agreement dated November 4, 2003, with a non-disclosure clause so broad it prohibited the signatory from characterizing her role in the founding of Cole Dynamics in any forum, in perpetuity. A physician's letter arranging a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation, dated 4 days before any evaluation occurred. A settlement check for $4 million made out to Elena M. Hart. Uncashed, never deposited, 22 years old. And underneath it, the original 2001 provisional patent filing for the routing architecture that became the Argus system, the thing that made all of it, the house and the wing and the room that was just for Coates. 2 names on it. W. Cole. E. Hart. Ethan sat on the floor of his father's study at 5:50 in the morning, holding a piece of paper with his mother's name on it, and understood that every wall of the house he grew up in had been paid for by a woman who was 4 minutes from a diner on Route 9, currently asking a nurse whether her son was coming. "She'd have taken you and used it against me," Warren said from the doorway. He sounded old. "Everything I built." "She built it," Ethan said. "Ethan!" "Say her name." Ethan stood up. "You haven't said her name once tonight, not once. 4 hours, say it." His father opened his mouth. And couldn't. Harrow House smelled like lemon cleaner and toast. The activity room had a bird feeder outside the big window and 11 residents in armchairs, and the morning light was doing something soft and forgiving to everything, and Ethan Cole stood in the doorway in a $4 jacket and could not make his feet move. Ruth went first. That was Grace's plan. "Ellie," Ruth said, crouching in front of a chair by the window. "Hey, sweetheart, it's Ruth. It's Sunday, Ruth, on the wrong day, isn't that something?" The woman in the chair was 61 and looked 75. Her hair was white and cut short and neat. Her hands were the hands from the photograph on the founder's wall, the hand at the cropped edge, holding the marker. She was holding a laminated photograph. "Ruth," she said, pleased, uncertain, "is it Sunday?" "It's Saturday, honey. I brought somebody." Ethan crossed the room. His legs did it without him. He knelt down beside the chair, and Elena Hart looked at him with the polite, floating, faintly anxious expression of someone who has learned that the world is full of people she is supposed to know. She didn't recognize him. He'd been told. Grace had told him 3 times in the car, "She may not know you, that isn't her fault, it isn't a rejection, don't make her feel like she's failed a test," and he had said he understood, and he had not understood at all, and it went through him like a blade. "Hello," Elena said kindly, "do you work here?" "No," Ethan said, "no, I..." And then he stopped. He reached into the paper bag he'd brought and took out an orange. He didn't say anything. He just sat down cross-legged on the floor at her feet, the way you'd sit on a kitchen floor in a $5 million house, and he dug his thumb in, and he began to peel it in one long, unbroken spiral. And he hummed 6 notes, up and down and up at the end, unfinished, left hanging in the air of the activity room like a door standing open. Elena Hart went absolutely still. The photograph slid out of her fingers into her lap. Her mouth opened slightly. Something moved behind her eyes. Grace, watching from the doorway with both hands over her mouth, would say afterward that she had never seen anything like it in 8 months of clinical rotations and never expected to again. Something came up from a very long way down, through 11 years and 22 years, and a fog that had taken almost everything and surfaced. Her hand came up. It found the side of his face. "You didn't finish it," Ethan said, and his voice went to pieces. "You never finish it." "Sonny," said his mother. And then, with her thumb moving on his cheekbone, exactly the way it had moved when he was 4 years old in a hallway with headlights coming up the drive, in a voice full of enormous, patient apology. "I'm sorry it took so long." She had good days and bad days after that. That's the truth, and it deserves telling straight. Some mornings she knew him. Some mornings she asked Grace whether her son was coming, and Grace would say he's on his way, Ellie, except now it was true. Now it was true every single time, because he was in the parking lot or the hallway or the chair by the window, and he came for 11 months, almost every day, until the following June. They peeled a lot of oranges. Some other things happened, and they matter, so here they are. The uncashed check was voided and reissued with 22 years of interest, and Elena Hart's name went back on the 2001 patent, and in March, a filing was made with the Delaware Secretary of State that restored her as co-founder of record of Cole Dynamics, and the press did what the press does. Warren Cole stepped back from the board in April to focus on family matters. He and Ethan speak about 4 times a year. It is not warm, it is not nothing. Ethan has decided that's allowed to be the answer for now. The lobby of Cole Dynamics has a new photograph in it, 16 feet wide. It's the garage, the folding table, the whiteboard covered in her handwriting, and it is not cropped, and on the left, laughing with a marker in her hand, is a 29-year-old woman named Elena Hart. Ruth Callahan does not work doubles anymore. She thought about it. She thought about it hard. She stood in the Bluebird parking lot and told Ethan Cole she had never taken a dollar she hadn't earned, and she wasn't about to start at 64. So they compromised in the way she'd allow. The Bluebird's mortgage was quietly cleared, and Denny is the owner now, and there's a booth in the back corner with a small brass plate on the wall beside it that says ELEANOR's table, and every child who comes in with a parent who's counting change eats free forever, and nobody at the register is ever allowed to say a word about it. Ruth works Thursdays and Fridays because she likes to, and she gets home before dark. The taped $20 bill is in a frame on the wall of Ethan and Grace's apartment, a real apartment, 2 bedrooms, a radiator that bangs. Grace passed her boards in August. She works nights on a neuro floor, and she does not look at her watch. The frame is small, and it hangs by the door, and it's the last thing they touch on the way out, both of them, without discussing it, the way people do when they've decided you're one of theirs. Because a man with $91 billion behind him went out one night to find out if anyone in this world could love him for nothing. And he got his answer from a woman with cracked hands and $11 in her checking account, who had been holding it for 22 years, in a diner on Route 9, in a torn bill she could have spent 1,000 times and never did. That's what the test actually proved. Not whether Grace was real, not whether the world was cruel. It proved that all along, through every lonely closet and every empty room and every friendship that turned out to be arithmetic, somebody had already paid. In advance. Before he could even read. Dear viewers, if this story moves something in you, sit with why. Ethan Cole spent 26 years believing that money was the only reason anyone stayed, and he was wrong, and being wrong nearly cost him his mother. because the people who actually love us almost never announce it. They don't do it in headlines or in wire transfers. They do it in a taped-up 20 in an apron pocket, in a nurse who doesn't check her watch, in somebody's mother sitting on the floor, peeling an orange in one long spiral so a 4-year-old will have a treasure to hold. Ruth Callahan was invisible her whole life to everyone who mattered, and she turned out to be the richest person in that entire story. So here's what I'd ask you to carry out of this one. Go look again at the quiet people around you, the waitress, the aide, the neighbor, the one who never mentions what she's done for you. There is almost certainly somebody in your life who has been paying for you in advance for years and has never once sent you the bill. Find them this week. Tell them you noticed. That's the whole assignment. And before you go, if you believe that kindness given in the dark, with no audience and no reward, is the most powerful force there is, if you believe that the invisible people deserve to be seen, then do one small thing right now. Hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. Here's why it matters more than you think. Stories like Ruth's don't get told by accident. They only survive because people like you decide they're worth passing on. Every subscription is a vote that says this kind of story still deserves a place in the world. Every bell you turn on means the next person scrolling at 1 a.m., lonely and half convinced that nobody is good anymore, gets handed proof that they're wrong. You've just spent this time with a woman who kept a promise for 22 years and never asked for a single thing back. She didn't cost you anything. She just needed someone to hear her. Subscribing takes you 2 seconds and costs you nothing, and it's how you make sure the next Ruth gets heard too. So if you're the kind of person who would have paid for that boy's dinner, subscribe, ring the bell, and stay with us. And tell me in the comments, who is the Ruth in your life? Name them right now. Let's fill this comment section with the people nobody ever thanked. I'll be reading every single one.